Hello and welcome to the a16z podcast. I am Ben Horowitz and I am here with Shannon Callahan, and we are going to talk about human resources. Shannon, in working with startup companies, what's the biggest mistake that you see companies make with respect to HR?
I would say the biggest mistake I am seeing is that they're not bringing it on soon enough. A lot of our CEOs and founders feel that once they've hired the recruiter, they've kind of covered themselves on the HR front.
That's interesting because recruiters are kind of the opposite of HR.
To some degree, yes.
Yeah, so you and I have talked about this in the past, but recruiters from a personality standpoint, to be a world-class recruiter, you have to be kind of a world-class salesperson. And generally, world-class salespeople tend to have a fairly self-centric view of the world, like that's what makes them good. And, you know, that kind of charisma and attitude. And HR, on the other hand, is like the opposite. It's, when done well, it's a kind of very low-profile, kind of thankless job, but very important job. And it's unusual that a recruiter would become like a great head of HR. Yes.
Yes. And I think that the other mistake that it's not a mistake, but I think where they're going down the wrong path is there are tons and tons of recruiters that want to take on HR, which means that they're either not hiring the best recruiter who wants to go out and hunt and make the kill to build an incredible technical team, or they're putting someone who has that skill set in charge of HR. So both are a disconnect. Right.
But recruiters are pretty good at selling CEOs on the fact that they should be head of HR. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that is the great irony. So when we talk about HR, like what is HR?
So when I talk to our founders, I always talk to them about, the worth of HR is that they are an extension of the founder in their vision, in the way that they want to build the company, in how they bring people on board, and how they actually build the company successfully. They take what the CEO wants the company to be and partners with them to ensure that all of those things are happening. That's like the importance of HR. HR also is the person, it's kind of the voice of the people to the CEO as the company grows. A CEO can't stay connected with every person in an organization. And so they should be that, a confidant to the CEO, but also the person who can roll up themes and issues that need to be addressed in an organization.
Right. And so the CEO is kind of, in some ways, in charge of the company culture and the company's management and so forth. And the head of HR helps the CEO to succeed on that mission.
Correct.
So you spoke earlier about people don't want to bring HR in early enough. And, lately we've seen some companies kind of get into a spot of trouble by not having HR early on. So talk about how HR helps kind of protect the company from itself.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to address is what you were just saying. A lot of CEOs don't want to bring HR on, and that comes from a lot of folks feel that once they bring HR in, they're becoming a process kind of policed company, that it's going to change the culture, that this person is really there to make sure that everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that one is false. If you hire the right HR person, as I said, they're an extension of the CEO. HR comes in to kind of, I think you said this before in one of your blog posts, kind of quality assurance against management. So if you think about if a CEO is setting the tone on how communication is going to take place, how people are going to be managed, if there are a performance issue, providing feedback, kind of making sure that things are done in the right way, that's what HR is there for. And, when you think about HR, there is the ugly, C word of compliance, which as a company grows from, in the state of California, once you hit 25 employees, there's a lot of rules and regulations you need to follow. So a good HR person that comes on board is making sure that there are, processes put in place. There's ways in which to address issues within an organization from a legal standpoint to protect the company, the employees, and everyone who's interacting with the company.
Right. And it's interesting. When I started working in Silicon Valley, we used to kind of have to dress differently for work than we were at home. Sometimes they'd make us put on suits and stuff. But one of the benefits of that is everybody kind of understood that they were at work. And I think, one of the things that we see is that sometimes as companies grow, it's confusing. It can be confusing, like what behaviors at home are not okay at work. And what are some of the things that you see, and how can HR help with that?
So I think, there's a couple of questions that come through a lot from our CEOs. Just one of them would be, policy around dress code. And how do you, and to your point, people, especially when you think about some of the, technical companies that have a little bit of a hacker mentality, like it's hip, it's a really cool place to work. How do we make sure that it's still a place to do business? And so kind of setting the tone at the top as a company grows. We've had some of our companies that have started, inside a house. How do you, one of the issues that comes up there is, I had a conversation with one of our CEOs who said, well, we really want to make sure that we're hiring females, but we're finding that a lot of them don't want to come and work at the house and live at the house. Well, it's, congratulations, you're growing.
Yes.
You're becoming a big company or a bigger company. And you have to, if you want to attract the talent, you have to start to evolve into a company that is comfortable for everyone that works there. And so that's kind of changing the tone at the top and evolving the culture, figuring out what was important when you were all working in a house, and how do you maintain that once you move into office space?
Right. That's a really interesting point that you bring up, that oftentimes if you have a super pronounced culture and you all live in a house together and kind of have a unique style, that can undermine your diversity efforts and you can create an environment that doesn't feel inclusive to somebody who either didn't live in the house and isn't part of that group. So how does a kind of good head of HR help you evolve from a kind of tightly cohesive but homogenous team into a kind of broader, more diverse team?
So I think it goes back to it still goes back to the type of talent you're attracting and kind of, broadening what you're looking at when you bring people on board, as well as your onboarding process. So once again, it's looking at, everyone talks about culture, and it's looking at what was so incredibly awesome about when we were all living in the same place. And it's typically communication, it's having meals together, it's making sure that, anything the founders are thinking is being passed on to the person that's sitting, on the couch next to them. How do we move that over? And a great HR person will actually be able to dive in and figure out what are those 4 nuggets that are really critical to the culture, and transfer that into an onboarding. How do we onboard people? How do we get everyone understanding the vision that I, as the founder, have? How do we make sure that everyone is connected? And how do we do all of that while we transition into a bigger company?
Yeah, no, that's great. And, one of the things that I think nobody ever believes that their company is not inclusive. Like, I've never spoken to a founder who says, oh, no, we're exclusive. We don't let anybody in who's a woman. Like, that never actually gets said, and nobody ever thinks that. But then when you talk to women, you hear that all the time, that, oh, that's not a good place to work for women and so forth. And it turns out to be the little things. It turns out to be the way conversations flow. It turns out to be the kinds of jokes that are made, or the kind of chat rooms that are available inside the company. So can you talk about, some of those little things that might make somebody feel uncomfortable who wasn't kind of from the original core group?
Yeah, so I think it's, I don't even think that I think it doesn't matter male, female. I think it really, one of the things, and I think we went through this at Opsware and LoudCloud, there was a very tight group of people that when you first start a company, it's blood, sweat, and tears that go into that, and you build this very solid bond. And so I think there's everything that you touched on. It's kind of knowing all the history of the company and referencing the history of the company constantly when you're making go forward decisions, and not, I work with our CEOs to think about let people bring new ideas to the table. Hear everyone's ideas, make people feel included. Include new people as you go and do things on the weekends because you've been doing stuff together 24/7. Include more people into those functions. As a CEO, make yourself more available. The people that you've been working with for the last 2 years feel very comfortable coming and speaking to you. Go out and hang out in the break room and talk to people. It's being active in including people. And yes, like as you bring on different people from different backgrounds, be conscious of what used to be okay to say might not be as okay to say now.
How about on things like, everybody talks about, the key in Silicon Valley is having the best people, and we're all about the best people, and everybody is going for the best people and thinks they have the best people and all these things. But how does HR help a company really both kind of build a company of the best people possible and then know that they're doing that and not kidding themselves on it?
Right. So I think this goes back to having the right process. And I think that's one of the things many of our CEOs are like, we don't want to put too much process in place. But unless you define a process and understand what the best looks like, it's very hard to continue to hire against that bar. So really understanding and defining what different people's roles are in an interview process and making sure that you are diving into skill sets and cultural fit and all of those different things during the process. And then holding people accountable to actually evaluate the people they've just spoken to. So many times I talk to, heads of recruiting or CEOs, and they say we get together and we do thumbs up, thumbs down. Well, everyone should always have mixed opinions on everyone that they hire. It's finding the best person, and not everyone. There's going to be give and take, but you want to make sure that bar is like very, very high. And when you step away from a solid process, your bar starts to slip. The second piece is measuring people's productivity. And that starts with the second process that I feel is so crucial to companies, and we're seeing more and more of our companies embrace this, is having the onboarding plan designed and ready to implement before you even make the hire. So it doesn't matter who you hire. The onboarding plan is the still same onboarding plan, and being able to set objectives on day one and measure someone against those very solid objectives in 30 days, and 60 days and 90 days, and addressing a problem if they're not the best.
Right.
And so it's the thing that everyone's always afraid of is HR comes in and puts process in place, but a great HR professional will help define how someone is successful in an organization and help them get there, and then measure people on it.
Right. And you've talked about that a bunch, that, HR can help measure what's going on with employees and whether you're getting the right ones and whether they're getting productive, and I assume whether they're happy. How does HR kind of partner with the CEO and the management team to get to really good human metrics?
I think, each company I think is a little bit different. You have to determine what does a successful employee look like and how do we want to measure them? What is the output that we, want to see from people? Are they a cultural fit? Are they working well with others? There's some people that just aren't going to work well with others. So why, you might not, it's not something that should be deciding if somebody is a great employee or not. But I think it's really about sitting down as a management team and determining what does the perfect employee look like in this organization, and then what do we put in place to measure that? And those can be, it comes from setting clear objectives as an organization and then measuring people against those objectives that are set. Right.
Now that's really interesting. And, one of the things that I hear a lot from CEOs who don't want to hire HR is that kind of HR is synonymous with politics and rumors and gossip and all the things that you would hope HR would help you prevent. And so there are a lot of people who have come from organizations where HR is sort of the problem with respect to that stuff as opposed to the solution. And so how do you avoid that? And why does that happen, and how do you avoid it?
So first I will say I think that is a reputation that HR professionals have brought on themselves in the past. And it comes from knowledge is power, and HR folks a lot of times use that knowledge to kind of manipulate an organization. I think it's the same thing as hiring great engineers or product managers or designers. It goes back to knowing what you're looking for and hiring against that, and referencing people and really understanding what they bring to the table. There are a lot of really crappy HR people in the Valley, and there's some great ones too. And it's a matter of like finding the great ones that they want to partner to build something important. They don't want to just, police an organization and use their knowledge to get things done in the organization.
Right. And how do you go about figuring that out when you look at kind of a candidate for HR and you think about, okay, is this person really focused on improving the management quality of the company, or, becoming a world-class and having the best people who have the best employee life cycle, versus, okay, I'm going to find out who likes who, what the complaints are, and then I'm going to use that to move myself up the organization. How do you kind of distinguish those two?
Yeah, so when I interview a lot of the HR folks that go into our portfolio companies, and the thing that I really focus on is past experiences and what they've actually done in past experiences. So there's a lot of HR professionals that have not necessarily grown a company. They've been at a company once it's large, and I think good HR people have really good domain expertise in certain areas, and they know how to get a job done. And so I focus on HR professionals who have actually rolled their sleeves up and really done something in the past, not just necessarily come from like a business partner standpoint. I think business partners in large organizations they don't fit well in growing an organization from the ground up. So I kind of look at the background. I also really dive into with references. I think it's really, to me, references are critical for an HR hire, and understanding not just executives that they supported, but talking to people in the organizations they supported to understand how they utilized their HR person. So I think more importantly, when you're hiring an HR person, it's understanding what they're really good at, understanding where they would need to hire to complement their skills, and then doing the references, not just with executives, but with people who use them to solve problems within an organization.
Right. And there's a whole another kind of part of HR which kind of gets taken for granted, but ends up being fairly important. And it's a part employees care about a lot, which are things like benefits, payroll, 401k, health insurance, vacation time, all these kinds of issues, and which go also hand in hand with compliance. When you look at HR people and their skill sets and that, stock option plans and all these kinds of things, what do you look for from a knowledge set and a philosophy standpoint to see if somebody really understands how to do a great job on the thing that everybody cares about, but nobody will ever say thank you for? Right.
So ironically, I think there's many HR people in the Valley don't have a lot of knowledge in that area. And so I do love diving into what people have done in those areas before. And I do think it's okay. An HR professional needs to understand and be able to articulate a total compensation package that is given to employees and understand the importance of it, which are all the other things that you just referenced that a lot of folks don't talk about. But I think they need to know how to leverage external sources if they don't have great knowledge in it, but they also HR professionals need to have an overall network that they can go to really stay on top of what's going on in the market, what is competitive, what's important to the employees, what are the trade-offs, what do we need to be implementing when, and it's not something that can completely be outsourced and forgotten about. And there are some, HR professionals that just don't think about that side of the world, and they need to.
Right. Yeah. Employees care.
They do care. Vacation is very important.
Yes. The actual human resources care about it, even if the human resource professional does not. No, that's really interesting. So let's talk about kind of the hardest, some of the hardest parts of a company, which are, firings, layoffs, and lawsuits from employees. And at least, and they tend to go together in that if you do fire someone or if you do lay somebody off, at least in many states, particularly in California, your likelihood of getting sued is actually pretty high. And so how does kind of HR help both the CEO on the kind of psychological part of that as well as the legal part of, what happens when you have to make reductions or make performance decisions? Yeah,
so I think they're, two completely different situations. And I would say it is for founder CEOs, it's probably the first termination is one of the hardest things that they go through. I would say it doesn't matter if it's a reduction in force or if they're having to terminate someone who's a performance issue or for other reasons. It is, you talk about, the psyche. It totally, it's a hard thing to do. They feel, when you're building a company, you feel like you're always hiring the best, and you feel like once you start working with people that everyone's your friend and no one would ever do anything bad. So it's really hard when they're making their first termination. It's about, I always remind our CEOs that it's about respecting an individual, whether you're bringing them on board or if you're terminating them, if it's, performance-based or if it's in a layoff. It's all about respect because they are still an ambassador to your company when they leave. So if let's go with the first one. If it's a performance-based termination, the first thing that an HR professional would help someone who's doing this is to understand what feedback has been given. How was the feedback received? How did you continue to address performance? If you do that, you get to a termination, 90% of the time, the employee is not surprised. I always start a conversation with a CEO asking, is the employee going to be surprised? And when the answer is yes, it means that there's been no feedback. And this kind of goes back to culture. Most people do want their culture to be, ongoing feedback is provided to folks. If you think about layoffs, it's also about very much about respecting the individuals and making sure that as people are leaving the company, they are, treated with the utmost respect. I mean, you've referenced that you laid me off once, and
yeah, that was
I'm
a mistake.
Still here.
Yeah.
But it had to do with, understanding the contributions that people have brought to the table and making sure that they're valued on their way out. But I think, the second piece from a legal standpoint, another thing CEOs hate to hear is getting an employee handbook in place. That is like the number one thing that will protect every company from any type of termination and any type of lawsuit. And it doesn't have to change your culture. Right.
Yeah. So, Shannon, thank you so much for this excellent discussion. You have been listening to the A16Z podcast. I am Ben Horowitz. Thank you very much.
All right, A16Z podcast listeners, a little bit of background on what's coming next. We have a new friend of the firm, Divine, who is a musician and an avid reader of Ben's blog and Ben's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. In all that reading, Divine was inspired to write a song, Venture Capitalist, which Ben caught wind of and loved. Up next is another original Divine piece, which he wrote exclusively for this podcast. It was produced and mastered by our own Chris Lyons. So check it out. Let us know what you think. And most of all, enjoy.
Let's rally in Silicon Valley. Rich VC firm that got the best burns throughout Northern Cali. Entries in Horowitz. Entries in Horowitz. A16Z. My global stretch through the mobile tech. See the world through them Oculus binoculars. 3D reality, we on the verge. Oculus and Facebook merge. Mark Zuckerberg, $1 billion Bitcoin splurge. Software eats the world, it's just the Internet of Things. What's the next biggest thing in this tech industry? Get your entrepreneur on. You starting to start up? Better get your smarts up. Ben Horowitz, let's rally in Silicon Valley. Rich VC firm that got the best burns throughout Northern Cali. Entries in Horowitz, podcast, be more of this. If you want the best hunch when you're trying to tech crunch, A16Z.